Hi, I'm Pete Miller, President and CEO of the Institutes. We're a global not-for-profit whose mission is to educate, elevate, and connect the people focused on risk management and insurance. You're listening to Predict and Prevent, a podcast that explores how technology and resiliency can prevent losses before they occur. In each episode, we learn about innovative solutions and hear from leading experts on how they are making these approaches a reality today. Welcome to the Predict and Prevent podcast from the Institutes. I'm your host, Pete Miller, and today we're joined by Gabriel Glynn, CEO and co-founder of MakuSafe, a company that is transforming workplace safety through wearable technologies and data analytics. In our conversation, Gabriel shares how MakuSafe is moving workplace safety from reactive to proactive by collecting environmental, motion, and voice data through their innovative wearable device. We explore how this technology has helped companies achieve record low workers' compensation costs, the importance of company culture in successful implementation, and how giving frontline workers a voice leads to meaningful safety improvements. Gabriel's passion for workplace safety was inspired by his father's career in industrial safety management. When his father told him that traditional safety management was essentially waiting for something bad to happen, Gabriel knew there had to be a better way. Today, we'll discover how his solution is helping companies reduce workplace accidents by 50% or more in their first year of implementation. Well, I'd love to hear about the story of how MakuSafe got started and the company's mission. So can you tell us a little bit about that, Gabriel?
Yeah. It really started about a little over 10 years ago. I was spending some time with my father at a facility where he was a safety director, and he was responsible for about 2,000 people's lives every day. And he was a team of one. And I had recently just sold a software company. I was kind of a software guy, and spending time with him, I was trying to understand, like, what does a safety manager do? What's your role? And he told me something that actually really kind of broke my heart, which was, well, I wait for something bad to happen. I figure out why it happened. I put a plan in place so that bad thing doesn't happen again. And then I spend a bunch of time filling out paperwork. And by the time I'm done with that, something else bad has happened. And so I repeat the process. And so that's when I kind of put my brain to work on how can we help folks like my father become less reactive when it comes to workplace safety. It's certainly easy to understand why things are happening when you've had a lot of bad things happening, right? It's kind of how you learn when you're a toddler, when you're a kid, don't stick your finger in that, don't touch that. This hurts if you do that, right? But I don't know that we need to do that in the workplace, right? We have the ability to capture data that we can turn into information and begin to understand what are some of the risks and hazards that are present and that are ever changing around our workers when they're on the job site. And are there clues within that data where we could send information off to folks like my father, and they could go out and proactively try to mitigate that risk from happening. And so that was the thesis. It was born out of a desire to help folks in the safety industry move from reactive to proactive.
That's a great story. I appreciate that. And, that's kind of what we've been trying to do. So we call it predict and prevent, but we're ahead of us. And that's something that we find, very compelling. So how does MakuSafe differentiate itself from others in the workplace safety industry?
Yeah, I think there's probably a few things that I would focus on. I mean, one, our technology captures so much data compared to a lot of the things that are out there. And we can go into more detail, but environmentals and motion and human voice and ergonomics, all of these other things, there's a lot of stuff out there that maybe we'll just focus on heat stress, for example, or sound exposure. But what we've done is we've combined all of those things into one, because we know there are sometimes things in the environment that cause our body motions to change, right? And so being able to have the data that shows the context of when that's happening and maybe why that's happening, I think is important. So that's one thing, is just the broadness. Number two is our philosophical approach. I knew early on, before my father was a safety manager, he worked in the shop for 20 years as a machinist, right? And so these folks, they want to come in, they want to do their job, they want to get home at the end of the day, they don't want to be distracted. And so there's a lot of stuff out there that we're putting on workers that's designed to buzz the worker or send them some sort of feedback to get them to stop doing something that they're doing. And what I recognize is the reality is most of those people aren't ergonomists, right? They're factory workers, they're machinists. And so if they've got something on their body that's buzzing them every time they move something or pick something up, I don't know that they're going to know what to do about that or what to do with that. Even if they've been trained on proper motions, they could be going, I'm doing the proper motion, but yet they have an old football injury that prevents them from moving perfectly to the algorithm, right? And things like that. So we didn't want to present negative feedback to the worker. Instead, what we want to do is we want to gather that information, that data in real time and put it in the hands of folks like my father and other operations and safety leaders to be able to go have a human being conversation with that worker and say, Pete, we're so happy that you're working so hard. The system is telling us this. We're just concerned that this isn't going to be sustainable for you. So we just want to do some observation here and see if there's something we can change about how you're doing it so that we can make sure you can continue to do this job for years and years, right? And we feel like culturally that drives better outcomes. And so those are some of the key things that stand out. And as we get into talking a little more in detail about the technology itself and what we're gathering, voice is a cornerstone of that. We're one of the only technologies that I've seen out there that allows immediate voice communication from frontline workers to leadership to capture all kinds of different things. And that's a feature that I would say our customers, when they're evaluating wearable technology, we're told more often than not that was a deciding factor in wanting to go with our technology over something else.
So let's dig into the technology a little bit. So, like a wearable device, as you're saying, seems to be sort of the heart of your solution. So, can you walk us through exactly what that device monitors, and then you talked a little bit about how you can do that, and it's not intrusive to workers. But could you expand on that a little bit as well?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, pop this off my arm here. This is one of our wearable devices. You can see it's a little bit larger maybe than my thumb. And that just clips into an arm holster with an elastic armband on the worker, kind of up around their head area, but really out of the way from the work that they're doing. And when they check a device out from one of our kiosks, it pairs that device with that worker for the day. And then they just do their job. They don't have to do anything with the device. Again, the device isn't going to send them feedback or buzz or beep or do anything. They just do their work. And while they're doing that, we're gathering a variety of different types of data. So I'll focus on environmentals first. So it's a full noise dosimeter. We're looking at the time weighted average of sound exposure for that worker of every minute of the work that they're doing, regardless of what's changed around them. We're looking at light levels, temperature, humidity. We calculate a real-time heat index for people. We're looking at air quality, so VOCs, CO2, air pressure, just a variety of things in the environment, some of which can be really harmful to people directly, but then also some of it is really contextual, right? If we can begin to understand that people are slipping and tripping in a certain area of a facility when the temperature reaches 78 degrees and the humidity is at 63%, we know that that's a risk threshold for us, right? And we can turn on air handlers before we get to that risk level, right? So some of it, again, is contextual. And then I'll move over to the motion side. So when we look at physical motions, we're trying to analyze a few different things. One, slips, trips, and falls, right? And a slip and a trip that don't result in an accident is a near miss, right? And oftentimes somebody will report, I tripped and I broke my wrist. And they go out and they go, what did you trip on? And they said, this air hose that's laying here. And then 7 other people go, oh yeah, I tripped over that stupid thing yesterday, right? So those were all near misses that were never reported that told us there's a common hazard in that area that we can get rid of pretty easily. So slip, trips, and falls are important. We're also looking at what we call worker physicality. So how much energy am I producing while I'm doing my job? And how does that compare to my peers that also do the same job? And we can get into some of the use cases on this data and some of the nuance of it, but it becomes really interesting. You see quite a distribution of people, even if they have the same output, that use more or less energy than each other. So that's on the ergonomic side of things. I'll shift over to location and spatial awareness. So we're not tracking people's location constantly. So we don't know if they went into the bathroom. It kind of goes to your question on adoption and acceptance. what we're tracking is when an event happens or when something happens, we need to know where generally in the facility it is. Was it on loading dock A or was it on loading dock B? Those kinds of things that we're looking at for location. We also do a lot of human to machine connectivity and interaction. As you know, a lot of people are investing in smart machinery, automated machinery, and things like that. Well, now if you have a device on a worker that is broadcasting a signal, those smart machines can pick up that signal and it can see that it's Gabriel Glynn that's standing in front of that machine now. It can check and see, am I authorized to use the machine? Yes. It can see if my training log is up to date. Yes. It can unlock and let me use it. And it might go to a specific speed that's prescribed to me, all without having to adjust the machinery or do any sort of setup or anything like that. So we do a lot of that interactive piece. And then the last thing on this device itself is what we were chatting about earlier, is the My Voice feature. And that's a feature where the employee can just push a button, hold the button. It will begin recording what they're saying up to 15 seconds. And when they let up on that button, within a few seconds, their supervisor is going to get a text message of what they just said. They can listen to the audio file. But it's a really slick way for employees to report, near misses, broken equipment, missing tools, process out of control, quality alert or quality assurance issues. We get a lot of things through that voice feature. And I don't know a company out there that doesn't want to hear more from their frontline, because those folks know the most of anybody in the company.
I think I was looking at your website, which I thought was super informative. And one of the videos was very interesting to me because it was an animation of a forklift going through a warehouse. And it seemed to be able to understand when there was a lot of people, like I think the term was high, medium, and low density. So can you just is that network together then? And you can change, can you actually change the parameters of the drive, tell the driver there's a lot of people here? How does that work?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. That's our newest product, and that's called Scout. And similar to how we do human to machine interaction, we recognize again, forklift and pedestrian accidents are usually very severe for the pedestrian. So they're incredibly costly. And a lot of the technology that was on the marketplace to combat this would stop a forklift in its tracks if it, detected somebody or things like that. And there's some inherent challenges in doing that. And sometimes you actually end up injuring the person when you lose the load off of the front of the fork truck. And so we thought, our philosophy has been, let's gather data that tells a story, and we can put that story in front of our safety and operations leaders, and they can decide what they want to do operationally. So when we rolled Scout out, what it is it's a Android tablet or phone that gets mounted inside of the cab of the fork truck, and it's running our MakuSmart app. And what it's doing is it's picking up on all these wearable devices on the workers that are around them, and it will change the screen color, and it will let you know that the density is high, medium, or low. But what's more important is the data that we gather on the backside. And in our pilot with a large beverage company, they ran this at a warehouse, and after a month of gathering data, they had a baseline of how many interactions between people and fork trucks they have, which is inevitable in that kind of business. And then they looked at things like which drivers were most prone to have interactions, which pedestrians were most prone, what times of day are these things occurring, right? So they're able to see a lot of visualization from this data, and they zeroed in on a period of time where they said, there's a lot of interaction here. And what they discovered is that was break time. And you had a lot of fork trucks come into the break room with a lot of people coming to the break room. And so now with the data, they said, well, we're going to set up a parking lot, and fork truck operators will park in the parking lot and walk, 50 meters to the break room. And they were able to cut down between that and a couple other operational changes. They cut down on over 85% of their interactions with workers the very next month. Right. And so again, I think the power is when you have the data and it tells you a story and you could take action on it. The next powerful piece out of that, Pete, is that you get to see the net results of your action. So if you think back to when I said I sat down with my father and he said, I wait for something bad to happen, then I put a plan in place so it doesn't happen again. Well, one of my follow-up questions was, how do you know your plan was any good? And he said, well, if less people get hurt next year doing that same thing. And I'm like, that's a really terrible way to find out that your plan was bad, right? And so here again, with the power of data, you can make that operational change and know, is it making an impact, and to what degree is that impact? So you can make better business decisions, and you're not just relying on waiting for the stack of accident forms for 2025 to compare it to the stack of accident forms from 2024 and hopefully see that it's smaller.
That's a really, really great story to tell, right? I mean, such a large decrease by using a network kind of technology. That's very interesting. So you talked a little bit about data. Let me just circle back for a minute. How does MakuSafe help employers interpret data collected by the hardware beyond kind of that example you gave? Are there other things that you do?
Yeah, so been in market for about 3 years now. We've gathered 7 million hours of human work on our devices, which equates out to billions and billions and billions of data points. And so early on, we recognized that we're going to be streaming a lot of different types of data and a pretty high quantity of data. And we have to be able to apply technology to allow folks like my father, who he'll admit it too, he's not very technologically savvy, right? So you have to give them a single pane of glass that takes all of that data and turns it into actionable insights. And that's what we call MakuSmart. That's our software platform that processes, analyzes all this data, groups things together in very easy to digest visualizations, things like stack ranking physicality of workers, and seeing what the trends are in certain areas or job roles of air quality or sound exposures, those kinds of things. Something that literally they can just get in, they can look at a dashboard, and in their 1,000,000 square foot facility with 2,000 people, he can go, I need to go here, I need to talk to this person, and here's the data that tells me why I need to talk to them. We got to figure something out that's going on there. And that's a way better process than the hour-long stroll that he would take through the factory twice a day just to see if he could be in the right place at the right time to affect something.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. But any more examples of how you're able to use the data to give a client an unexpected insight to an ergonomic challenge or productivity issue? That may be the traditional sort of not wander around, but go around with a purpose, but sort of be in the right place at the right time approach might have missed.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about being in this role is hearing the stories from customers. And I remember early on, one of the companies we were doing work for, this specific job role flagged as being the highest physicality job role in the facility. And they called us up and said, there's something wrong with your data. This is one of the easiest jobs. Can you look into it? And we looked through the data. We're like, it shows that it's really physical. And they said, well, we don't get that. It's these little gals, and all they do is they roll these empty plastic barrels that used to be full of fluid onto a pallet, and then the pallet gets taken away. And that's really about all they do. So I said, well, go do an observation, like spend an actual shift and see if you can identify why this is flagging. Well, it didn't take him long. The other part of the role that he wasn't really thinking about was the fact that when these barrels come and they're full and they get set on the floor, they have to take a cap off of that barrel. And they use something called a bung wrench, which is a big, long metal wrench. And again, these are kind of smaller gals. Barrels are kind of tall. Well, the first one gets up there and starts jerking away at this cap, trying to get it to break loose. And she's working on it. Finally, another gal gets done with her thing. She comes over and she starts pushing from the other side until crack, that cap comes off, and they're able to pull it off. And so they were blown away. And they invested in, I think it was $100 in a pneumatic bung opener, which is a little device that you just put on top of the cap, and they push a button and it pops that thing right out of there. And they were so grateful. They're like, that was our least favorite part of the job, and they never complained to people, never told anybody. But, that was shoulder surgeries waiting to happen, and just, high strain on the body. So that's one that stands out to me. We found a pinhole leak in a hydraulic hose that fed detergent into a washing machine at a facility, and air quality was flagging as bad. Nobody could see anything or notice anything different. Well, they brought equipment in and figured out that it was a leak in this hydraulic hose. We had a voice memo of a worker. A fall was detected. That sent an alert first. Then the voice memo came through, and it was the worker, and it was on a construction site. And he said, I just fell off the south side of the building. I'm fine, but I'm hanging by my tether. Can somebody come pull me back up? So, yeah, there was a combination of features on the technology that alerted somebody, that something was wrong. And so we get, so many stories like that. And it just really motivates our team. We share that with everybody across the company, our technology, even the software guys that are just there to write software. They love hearing that the work that they're doing is making a difference in the lives of these people.
I would certainly feel like that if I was hanging by a tether. I'd be like, thank God for this device, right? Because
Yeah.
not much good is going to happen from there. One of the things we hear about wearable technology is I think there's some concerns about privacy or being monitored. So how has that changed? How has MakuSafe addressed, those kind of objections in order to increase user acceptance?
Yeah, I'll break that into two responses. One is the technology itself, and then the other is the philosophy behind it. So, first of all, we're not gathering biometric data. There are devices out there that'll measure your skin moisture and your heart rate and those kinds of things. We're not looking at any of that. We're looking outward from the worker, not inward. And so I think that and the fact that we don't provide that negative feedback, you don't have that annoying device on your arm that's going buzz 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 all day while you're trying to do your job and trying to focus. And so I think that's part of it. Then if I think philosophically, we started this company as a group of people interested in workplace safety. And across our team now, we have almost every single person on the business side of our company has gone through and become a certified occupational safety specialist. They know OSHA code. Now, it's not a CSP. It's not something you dedicate years to, but it is a very long, in-depth, and expensive training process that we've put people through. Because if you're going to be on the business side of the house and interact with our customers and talk to the people on the plant floor on a day-to-day basis, you need to know what they're facing and what they're dealing with. And what we've heard time and time again from customers is how refreshing it is to talk to a technology company that speaks safety. And there's a lot of tech out there in this space and software applications, and anybody, AI can write an iPhone app these days, for workplace safety. But we really believe in it. We breathe it. It's personal to us. So I think that shines through in the work that we do. And I think that's a differentiator as well. And when we talk to the employees, when we're going to deploy at a new location, typically we'll stand right up there with leadership of the organization. They're saying, here's what we're doing and here's why we're doing it. And we're showing them, here's the data that's being gathered. Here's how that data is being used. And usually it takes a few weeks as people are kind of warming up to it. But once something gets picked up and a positive change is made because of the data telling them they needed to make a change, that spreads like wildfire through a facility. When people's jobs get made easier and their conditions get made more comfortable, and it was because the data said something had to change, they really appreciate that. So I think those are some of the things that are driving better adoption today than when we came into the marketplace even just a few years ago.
Yeah, I think one of the things you said earlier that I found very interesting, and certainly I have not heard before, was the idea that through your My Voice, frontline workers actually get a voice in what's going on. So, can you just dig into that a little bit more? Maybe an example where you've seen how this is done and how it gives a more complete picture of what hazards might be present on a work site?
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of the common, there's a fork truck in front of the fire exit, there's a spill here on the floor, those kinds of things. But we get all different types of information from the frontline to leadership. I can remember one early on where one of the workers pushed the button and said, hey, the raw material that they're working with, he said, hey, this material smells different than what it normally does. And that was it. Well, operations got that. They called QA. QA went down and found out that the raw material that they received on the truck that day to make their product was an inferior grade of the material that they need and not what was supposed to be on the order. And had that worker not taken a few moments just to say something like, this smells funny, all of that would have gone into production and they could have been facing untold amounts of money in recalls and brand damage to their product because it was using inferior materials and all kinds of things. So I think it's interesting when you go into these facilities and people still have the suggestion box on the wall that's 400 yards away from the workers that they're saying, hey, if you think of something, write it down and put it in there. People just don't do that. But you give them a tool like this where they don't have to stop their work or track somebody down. They can do it quickly. And some of our customers have turned this into a really positive thing culturally, Pete, where one of my favorites was a big board inside this facility. And on one side, it said, you said, and it was all the voice messages. And on the other side, it says, we did. And it was all the things that they were doing about the stuff that the employees reported through that. And that level of transparency builds a lot of trust between people. And sometimes a worker just wants to know that they were heard.
It would seem, Gabriel, just from what you've said and maybe some things I've observed, that at least as important as the technology to your client, it's also, is the client, do they have the culture to accept it, and are they transparent? Would that be an accurate statement in terms of successful implementation?
100%. We have some value statements internally that we use to evaluate our prospective customers. In the early days of a startup, when somebody says, hey, we'd like to buy your solution, you say yes, because my gosh, that's your goal at that time. But it doesn't take long to quickly learn that not everybody is a good customer. And what we found at the core of those customers that we found to be not great was culture. It was technology was being implemented for the purpose of going after people, as one example. And if we hear anything like that in our conversations with the customer, we let them know that culturally, we don't think that this is going to be a positive project for them. And sure, it's business that we miss out on, but it also is so costly for us to have to go back in 6 or 12 months and get equipment back and close down a contract that we worked so hard to get. And so culture, I would say, is the number one ingredient for technology like this and being successful. You have to have a high degree of trust between the frontline and the leadership that's above them.
There's a famous management guru, Peter Drucker. He says, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And that has been my experience. At any rate, let me get you to scope up a little from wearables. When you think about wearables and why you decided to do this, why is that a better technology than other potential solutions, do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on the application, right? I think there's a space and a place for a lot of the technologies that are out there in the market. Some of it maybe even is pointed to your previous question, Pete, around the culture of an organization. And asking somebody to put something on their body might culturally be very difficult for them. Whereas if they put cameras up in the facility and they can glean some information from that, they can still be data gathering and be more effective with safety with those tools than without. And so, part of it, when I originally came up with the concept, I was thinking about, putting sensor clusters around a facility, is what I call them, sensor clusters. And still, I felt like it fell short. One, obviously, you wouldn't have any ergonomic data from a sensor cluster that's mounted to a wall. But then two, I know from experience of being in these facilities and, my father working in a factory my whole childhood, right? You and I could be 10 feet apart from each other, and we got a machine between us, and I'm picking stuff up and putting it in, and you're pulling it out the other side, and the sound is coming off at you, and the exhaust is coming off at me. And at the end of the day, what I experienced was completely unique to me, right? And we were just a few feet apart from each other. And so I really wanted to bring technology down to the individual worker level and be able to understand what was that individual worker's experience and how did it compare to their peers. So we knew we had to do it at the worker level. The smartphone was a obvious, first thought, but the reality is, a lot of the facilities that we're in, they're not allowed to have a phone on the shop floor. It goes in their work locker when they come in. There's IP reasons for that. There's safety reasons for that. And so we knew we'd be limited on the application for it that way. And the last thing was we wanted to create an experience for that worker where they felt like they had an ally on their arm. And that's why we call the technology the ally. The device itself is the ally. We wanted them to have that feeling that something is there, it's present, it's looking out for them, it's watching all of these things. So the next time when they go to their supervisor and say, it is hot as hell in the southeast corner of this facility where I have to work 90% of my shift, And the shift supervisor goes, I checked the thermostat and it said it was 90 degrees. So that's hot, but that's not as hot as it can get, right? Well, then you find out from the data, well, the paint booth that's right next to him is making it so it's 112 degrees where he's at. So, the data can be an ally to that worker as well.
I think you've done an amazing job. It's a really cool product, and on your website, you have a lot of really interesting use cases with pretty good metrics and great story to tell. But of the results and achievement that MakuSafe has gotten through various implementations, which ones make you most proud?
Well, first and foremost, when our customers win awards for safety because of our technology implementation. One just last year won an award from National Safety Council for using technology and data to make significant changes to their safety and safety programs. And that was all done through MakuSafe. So watching them win is a really big positive for us. And then ultimately it's the results. So we just started getting in 2024 results from our customers. And what's great is they want to share with us. We had this thing implemented at these facilities. Here was their record prior to implementing in these facilities. Here's what it is today. And here's how they compare to the other facilities that do the same thing as them that aren't using MakuSafe yet in our organization. And the ROI numbers across the board are in the hundreds of % for implementing our technology. And I look at that and say, well, those are accidents that didn't happen, that typically happen, right? We had one customer that ran 2024 was their first full year. They had their lowest work comp in 12 years. And the owner said, it's not even fair to compare to that because we were a much smaller company 12 years ago. They've grown a lot. And so apples to apples, he said, it's probably the best we've ever had. So hearing those stories is important, again, to our team. That's the driving force behind what we do. And when it gets quantified like that for us, then it's really validating that we are making a difference.
Let's talk about the future. Obviously, you're a visionary and you've created a great organization in this space. But when you look forward, how do you see safety, workplace safety technology evolving?
Yeah, I think a couple of things come to mind. One, I think about the application of our data, right? Nobody's gathered all of this kind of data in any sort of magnitude at any point in history. And, we're at 7 million hours of human work now, and it's growing exponentially. And the thought of, my boys that are 13 and 10, maybe when they're off in college here in a few years, maybe they have access to data like this and they're able to do some analysis and understand that, by mixing it with some health data and this exposure data, we find out that if you're exposed to these types of sounds for X period of time, it's likely to lead to a higher probability of a mental disorder, right? I don't think we fully understand or appreciate the things in our environment and the mental toll that they can take on us. And I've been in some of these facilities, and I could tell you if I'm sitting next to a machine that goes ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk for 10 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week for 20 years, I'm probably going to be at risk, right? Right. So I think there's a lot that can be gleaned from data like this. And I'm excited to know that we're kind of at the forefront of gathering this type of stuff so that we can learn more about human work and human life. And then the other side of it is, as we've seen, obviously over the last year, the explosion of AI and how AI can process and understand data. I could tell you some of the exciting things that we're able to do with the data that we have just by asking AI questions around, is there a correlation between this and temperature, or is there a correlation between sound exposure and this? And it's really interesting to understand. And, we've gathered enough data now too, to be able to trend things. Like I can tell you, if you're in the southern 2 tiers of states in the United States, the average daily temperature exposure to a worker has gone up 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit in 3 years. And that's interesting, right? And if I'm a business owner, that's interesting to me because if my facilities are in the South and they're not air conditioned, for example, I can already look and say, here's how much time I spend on heat protocol, and here's what that equals in lost productivity. If this trend line continues, by the year 2029, I'm going to have X amount of productivity lost because of heat protocol, because we're going to be on it X amount more, which means if I want to make a decision on air conditioning my buildings, I'm now armed with some data that tells me, I can make this change, and I can learn that, by 2027, 2028, I'll have already earned that payback in the increase in productivity, right? So I think there's just so much opportunity with that kind of data.
Yeah, and it would be really interesting. There's a form of insurance called parametric insurance. And that says, based on a parameter from a trusted data source, we're just going to start paying claims, because we know if this parameter reaches this level, bad things are happening. So temperature being one, there are organizations that are now saying, in this case, if the outside temperature gets to X, nobody's going to work anymore because we're going to have too many insurance claims. But speaking of the insurance industry, do you work with insurers or risk managers in any way, or do you mostly work with facility owners?
It's a mix of both. We found an entry into the insurance space pretty early on through our friends at EMC Insurance Company. They're headquartered here in Des Moines. They read an article about the technology I was working on and reached out and said, "Hey, we think you're going to revolutionize worker comp insurance. We'd like to talk to you about it." And they've been a great investor, partner, friend of ours for many years now. And they helped us really understand what's our position in that worker comp space. And so today, a lot of the companies we work with, Pete, are large. They're self-insured. They're Fortune 500 brands. They have global locations, a lot of scalability opportunity. But we still do work with some of those middle market customers where maybe you've got, a few hundred employees up to a couple thousand employees. And, many times that organization is a part of a captive, right? Or maybe they are insured and they've got maybe a higher deductible, but they're also getting risk control services. And so we recognized if we can work with a company where the risk control folks at their carrier can also have visibility and a view into the dashboard of MakuSmart, they can also be proactively sending resources out. So now instead of, it's my month to go visit Jim's machine shop over here, I'm going to go do my visit. They can look at their dashboard and say, holy cow, there's an air quality issue going on at this facility over here. I'm going to hop in the car and bring some of our equipment, and we're going to go figure this thing out, right? So really help them be more efficient and directed in the way that they deploy those risk control resources. So that's primarily how we found ourselves working in that industry.
Gabriel, is there anything else we should know about MakuSafe?
I guess I'll end with a story. We've got a book coming out about the changing world of safety and how wearables is playing a part in that. And so that book's coming out. And in there, I share a bit of a personal story, which is, my drive for this industry and my passion for it continues to grow. But I gravitated towards it, not just because of my dad, but I found out that in 1919, there was a pretty catastrophic accident in my hometown of Cedar Rapids. Douglas Starch Works factory, which was the largest cornstarch producer in the world. That factory employed a lot of people from town. And one day the factory exploded and killed everybody inside, except for one person had decided to take their lunch break and go on a date with a gal that he met. And so he had left his buddies and left the building on his lunch date when the explosion happened. And that guy was my great grandfather. So had he not been going on a date with who ended up being my great grandmother, I wouldn't even be here today talking about this. So I've always just felt this personal draw to the space. My father being a safety guy, my mother being a nurse, both incredibly caring, compassionate professions. I found myself in this space and I found that it's really comfortable for me. And I appreciate being a part of it. And so many colleagues that help contribute to the book and to our thoughts and ideas in the process.
That is a great story. I like that a lot. That's really cool. Thank you for your work, because I think you're saving lives, and that's pretty cool. But thank you for your time, too. Pretty neat stuff. I appreciate it quite a bit.
Predict and Prevent is a podcast brought to you by the Institutes. Subscribe on your preferred listening platform and join us for future episodes, where we continue to dig into this approach and the opportunities it's creating for risk management and insurance.